So when we do the air brake system and all that, we'll do it based on how automatic it's supposed to be done, okay? Then you guys are all automatic? You guys are all doing an automatic test, right? Okay. So starting from the front of the vehicle, as you walk in towards it, you're looking for any kind of puddles under, any kind of leaks, making sure no hoses or wires are hanging down there. Making sure none of your, either side of your truck is not leaning to one side or another. So you do any kind of bad suspension, flat tire, or shift of a load. And looking at your clearance lights on top and reflectors, your headlights right here, and your signal lights. Making sure all your lights and reflectors are securely mounted. They're not damaged. They're proper color of amber on the top. Signals are amber and clear in the front. Make sure there's no moisture in here. They're clean and clear. There's no damage to them. Then we're going to go ahead and open up our hood to inspect the engine. 3-point of contact all the time. Start from this side of the engine. Alright, we're gonna inspect 3 components. That's your alternator, water pump, and compressor. And also we're gonna look for fluids. It's gonna be your coolant, power steering fluid on the other side, and also engine oil on the other side as well. Starting with the fluid number 1, coolant. Reservoir is securely mounted. There's no visible damage to it, no visible leaks. The cap is tight and all the hoses going to it are coming out. They do not have any sort of damage or leaks. Then we have our water pump down here. Water pump is securely mounted to the engine. No parts are missing. And it is a belt driven water pump. Make sure there's no leak to the water pump, and also the belt. You want to check the condition on the belt. It does not have more than 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of a slack in it, and make sure there's no damage on it either. What we're looking for is any kind of cuts, splits, or loose fiber, or weather rot, any sort of damage. Let's move to the other side. Got our engine oil right here. There's a dipstick. You will pull it out, wipe it clean, insert it back in there, and pull it out one more time to make sure the level is in between your minimum and maximum. This is where you will add your engine oil if you need to add more. The third fluid is right here, power steering fluid. It is securely mounted. Cap is tight. You will check the level from here. Make sure there's no leaks. And all the hoses that are coming out of it or going to it, make sure they don't have any sort of leaks, cuts, splits, any sort of damage. And then we move on to alternator, which is right here. Alternator, it is securely mounted, not loose or hanging. There's no damage to it, and it is a belt driven alternator. Belt does not have any loose fiber, no cuts or splits. Should not have more than 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of a slack to it. Then we have our air compressor down here, making sure that air compressor is securely mounted. There is no damage to it. I don't hear any audible leak. It is a belt driven air compressor as well. So we're going to check that belt exactly the same way I checked the other one earlier. Now we got our steering linkage starting from the steering shaft. Make sure it's securely mounted. It is properly greased on both sides. Does not have any bent or damage to it. And the U-joints should be properly greased. I think we can use some more grease over here now. And no missing parts or any objects stuck in between the U-joints. This is your power steering gearbox. It is secured to the frame. There is no damage to it, no leaks, and no missing nuts or bolts. Then we move on to our pitman arm and a drag link. You want to make sure they're both securely mounted. They're not bent, broken, or cracked. And castle nuts on the both joints are present. Cotter pins are present. And also you want to make sure that the rubber seal in between the joints are secured they are not damaged or missing. And also you want to make sure the high pressure hose that comes out of your steering box, it is not damaged, no loose fittings and no leaks. After that, you also have a couple more other components to your steering linkage. That is your upper control arm, lower control arm, and a tie rod. You want to make sure the upper control arm, lower control arm, and your tie rod, these components are securely mounted. There is no damage to them, no missing castle nuts, cotter pins, or no missing rubber bushings or damage to the rubber bushings. Now we're going to move on to our suspension. Starting with your spring mounts, front and the back, they are secured to the frame. There is no visible damage to them and no missing hardware on it. Then we have our leaf springs right here. Make sure they are securely mounted, not bent, broken, or cracked. They're not missing, shifted, or loose. And there should be a rubber seal in between your leaf springs and your spring mounts. Make sure it's not missing or damaged. U-bolts. U-bolts are securely mounted on top of the saddle. They're not shifted. There is no damage to them. And make sure the nuts at the bottom of your U-bolts are not missing or loose. We've got our shock absorber right here. Shock absorber is securely mounted on the top and bottom. There is no damage to it. There should not be any hydraulic leaks coming out of it, and the rubber bushing in between these nuts and bolts on the top and bottom should be present without a damage. Now we move on to our brake system right here. Starting with the brake hose, making sure that the fittings on the both sides of the brake hose, they are present, there is no damage to them, and the hose itself does not have any sort of kinks to it, breaks, any sort of damage to it, and making sure that there is no audible leak either. Brake chamber is right here. It is secured. There is no damage to it, no audible leaks out of it, and making sure that the U-clamp is present. It's not loose or missing. Then we have our slack adjuster and a push rod right here. Slack adjuster should not be bent, broken, or cracked. There is no damage to it, and so is for the push rod. It is not bent, broken, or cracked. There is no damage to it. Making sure your locking pin and a cotter pin is present, keeping them together, and it should be in a 90-degree angle to the chamber, and also should not have more than 1 inch of a play when you pull on it. Next thing will be your drums and linings. Drums, making sure there is no heat damage to the drum, no contaminants between your brake linings and your drum that will any sort of trash like leaves, snow, ice, or any kind of hydraulic leaks down there. And making sure your linings are not dangerously thin, it's not missing chunks. Next part will be your wheel. We're going to start with the tire, checking the sides of the side wall of the tires, making sure there are no abrasion, bulges, or cuts to it, no bruises on both sides. And the top of the tire, making sure it's evenly worn. It should always be a new tire on the steer axle, never used or recapped. Minimum thread should be 432 at all time. And making sure there is no objects like nails or any other sort of damage to the tire. Then we're going to make sure the bead does not have any damage, and I don't hear any audible leak around here. My rim is securely mounted. There is no damage to the rim, no unauthorized holes or welds or anything. This is steel, so then we got our lug nuts right here. You will remove these caps and make sure that all the lug nuts are tight, they're not missing, loose, and you're making sure that there should be no shiny thread here. That will be an indication of a loose lug nut. Now this is a cap for your hub seal. We'll remove this to make sure that the hub seal doesn't have any visible damage to it. It should be proper level, and there should not be any leak down there. Got my belt stem right here. It is secured. There is no damage to the belt stem, and the metal cap is present. and I will check the air pressure with the air pressure gauge. Do not kick it, or do not use a mallet or a hammer, because that will not tell you the pressure. That can only tell you if it's flat or punctured. Alright, before I finish this part, I'm going to look over one more time, just making sure I'm not missing anything. What I am missing is an overall view of all the hoses and all the wires around here to make sure they're all securely mounted. There should not be any sort of leak, and all the hoses, they're not missing any clamps and no damage to them. Alright, we move on to the side of the vehicle now, side of our tractor. Starting from here, mirror brackets are secured, no missing hardware. There's no damage to it. There's no damage to the back side of the mirror. There's no damage to the front side of the mirror, and make sure the mirror is clean. Door handle is functional. There's no visible damage to the door. It opens and closes properly. Making sure my rubber seal is present without a damage. And the windows, these are electrical, so I want to make sure the glass is not broken and they are functional once I turn on the engine. Also, you want to make sure the hinges are present, not missing any parts. Looking at my steps, they are secure, not loose or hanging. All the hardware is present, and making sure they are clean at all time. No debris on it, like snow, ice, leaves next to the fuel, so make sure there's no fuel or anything that might have you slip. Alright, now also there are some lights and reflectors right here on the side of the vehicle, the side of the mirror. Some have it right here, some have them right here. Make sure you are looking at them, making sure they are proper color. There should be no damage to them, no moisture in there. Proper color, amber. Now we're going to move on to our fuel tank right here. Fuel tank is securely mounted. The straps are present and tight. There is a rubber in between the straps. No metal to metal friction. None of the hardware is missing. Making sure these steps are secure. They're not damaged and they are clean. No missing parts. And also we're going to make sure you should open the cap and inspect for the safety chain and the rubber seal, making sure there's no damage to the rubber seal. And there should be no leak around the cap, and there should be no leak on the ground due to any kind of defect or damage to the tank. Now, this truck uses the DEF system, so you want to make sure you check this tank exactly the way you check the fuel tank. And also remove the cap to make sure that safety chain is present. Seal is present. There is no abrasions, bruises, or cuts to it. And again, there is no leak around here. We're also going to check the level of your DEF system. We will do that once we get inside the cab later. Now we're looking at the catwalk right here, making sure the catwalk is present, is free of damage. All the hardware is present, and it should be clean at all time. There's my exhaust. Making sure from top to the bottom, follow the pipe, make sure there's no damage to it, no holes, no rust, and no black soot that will indicate that there is a leak to it. Then making sure the brackets are present, with all the hardware is present, your exhaust is securely mounted. There's a drive shaft down here. You want to make sure that your drive shaft is securely mounted. There is no damage to the drive shaft. It's not bent, broken, or cracked, or any sort of modification on it. And all the hardware is present. Now your U-joints at the end of the drive line, you're making sure that the U-joints are properly greased. There should be no damage to the U-joints, and there are no objects stuck in between the U-joints. Looking at your frame, making sure the frame is straight, there is no damage to the frame, no unauthorized weld or holes on it. Alright, after that we're going to move on to one of the axle. You can check any axle you want, whichever gives you the better visibility. So I will check this one. Got my spring mount in the front. It's securely mounted to the frame. There is no damage to it, and all the hardware is present. Got my leaf springs down there. Leaf springs are securely mounted. There is no damage to the leaf springs. Making sure the leaf springs are not loose, damaged, or missing, or shifted. And the rubber seal in between your leaf springs and the leaf spring mount is present without a damage. Then we have our U-bolts right here. U-bolts are securely mounted. They're not bent, broken, or cracked. They have 4 nuts at the bottom, making sure those 4 lug nuts are present. There's no damage to them, and they're not loose. And making sure that the thread is not shiny, that will indicate that they're loose. The next part we have here is a shock absorber. Shocks, they are securely mounted on the top and bottom. It is secured to the frame. Rubber seal is present in between these nuts over here, and making sure that it doesn't have any hydraulic leaks out of it. There is an extra component to this suspension in the back of your tractor, which is airbag. Since it's a rubber, you're making sure there are no abrasions, bulges, or cuts to it, and you're listening to any sort of audible leaks. And your plates on the top and the bottom of your airbag are present. There is no damage to it, and all the hardware is present. They are securely mounted. Now we're going to move on to your brake system. Brake hose, it is securely mounted. The fittings are tight on both sides. They're not loose or leaking air, and making sure that your air hose does not have any cuts, splits, it's not kinked, and no weather rot to it, and no audible leaks. Brake chamber, securely mounted as well. There is no damage to it. Brake chamber also have a U-clamp around it. It's not loose or missing, and also making sure there's no leaks. We're looking for audible leaks through it. Now we have our slack adjuster and a push rod. Since this is a drive axle, you want to make sure that you release your brakes, and you chock your wheels before you release your brakes. And once you pull on it, it should not have more than 1 inch of a play with your push rod. And also you want to make sure that slack adjuster and a push rod is not damaged. It is securely mounted. The parts are not missing. And then we move on to our drums and lining. Drums, cast iron, so making sure that there is no heat damage to it. It is securely mounted, and there's no contaminant in there. We're looking for any kind of hydraulic leaks down there, leaves, snow, any kind of trash bags, or and then we're also looking for our linings, the brake pads. You're making sure that the brake pads are not dangerously worn. They are securely mounted. There is no damage to them. Now we're going to move on to our dualies right here. We're going to check both of the tires the same way. So let's go ahead and inspect one. Side walls of the tires, they are securely mounted. There is no damage to them, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts to it. And the top of the tires, making sure they're evenly worn. These are not mismatched tires. No nails or any sort of damage to the tire. These, you can use the recap or the used tires here. Now, in between the tires, making sure there is enough space. The tires are not rubbing against each other due to low air pressure. And also checking the butt space and in between, making sure the rims have no gap in between them. And you want to make sure there are no objects also stuck in between, okay? Now we move out here, looking at the rim. There is no damage to the rim. It's not bent, broken, or cracked. There is no damage to the bead. No modification to the rim. Looking at my lug nuts, they're all present. They should not be loose or missing. You're looking for a shiny thread that will indicate they're loose. Now this is a cap for your axle seal. There's a difference. This is your axle seal. The one in the front have your that's your hub seal. So here you will remove the cap and make sure that all the hardware is present. There's no damage to the axle seal, and you're looking for any sort of leaks under. Now the last part here is your valve stem. Valve stem is present, there's no damage to it. I'm missing the cap on it, so I'll report that to the maintenance. So I'll just grab one and put one on it, and I'm going to check the pressure with the air pressure gauge. Now one thing I did forget for the tire, this tires should have at least 2/32 of a thread depth on it. I think I covered everything on this axle, so let's go ahead and move to the mud flaps right here, making sure there's no rips, there's no damage to it. All the hardware is present, the bracket is present, and there's no damage to it. We're making sure there's proper clearance from the ground and proper clearance from the tire. Another thing on the back of the tractor we have here is your lights and reflectors. Making sure all the lights and reflectors are clear, there's no damage to them, they are proper color of red, and the reverse light is clear or white. And making sure these reflectors, they are very important, don't miss them. Make sure they are present, they're not damaged or missing. Alright, that's it with the tractor. Now we're going to move on to our connection. So the kind of connections we have here is, you got your electrical connection, you got your air connection, and also we have our fifth wheel connection down there. So let's start with the first one. One at a time. Electrical line, no exposed wire, there is no damage to it, no weather rot, and making sure the connection on your trailer and tractor, they are in lock position. Once you remove that, making sure there is no contaminant in between, and also all the pins are present, and your connections on the both side of tractor and trailer are in lock position. Next thing is your air lines, emergency and service line. Making sure there is no damage to that, no loose fiber, no cuts or damage to the hoses itself, and making sure all these hoses and wires are not rubbing against any part of your tractor or trailer that will damage them. Now glad hands over here on the trailer, making sure they're in a locked position, both of them. There's no damage to them, they're not loose, and there is a rubber seal in between them, making sure that the rubber seal is not damaged and it is present. And on the other side of the tractor side right here, making sure these fittings are not loose and they're not damaged, and there is no audible leak around here. Now we're going to move on to your fifth wheel. Starting with the apron, there's no damage to the apron. It is properly mounted. There's no modification on it, and we're looking for unauthorized modification. No holes or welding. And this is our fifth wheel right here. Some call it skid plate. Properly greased. There is no gap in between or daylight in between your apron and a fifth wheel. Making sure my locking pin, my pivot pin, and my cotter pin, they're all present here, not missing or loose. Then we got our release handle that's on the other side of the fifth wheel. You want to make sure it's not bent, broken, or cracked. It is secured, and it's all the way in a locked position. This is a sliding fifth wheel, so that's an extra component that you got to check over here. You want to make sure the air lines that are going to the sliding fifth wheel, the air lines do not have any sort of damage to it, no audible leaks, all the fittings are present. And this is the most important part of that. You're making sure that these pins are always in a locked position. Now we have our platform right here. It is securely mounted to the frame. There is no damage to it. There is no modification to it. And all my lug nuts, they are keeping it together with the frame. They are present. There is no damage to them. They're not loose. And you're looking for any kind of shiny thread that will indicate they're loose. Now we're going to move on to the back side of your fifth wheel. We got two things right here at the back. We got a kingpin that's coming out of the trailer, making sure that it is securely mounted to the trailer. There is no damage to the kingpin. It should be properly greased around there. And also the locking jaw that's keeping it in a locked position. You're making sure the locking jaw is not bent, broken, or cracked. It is securely mounted in a locked position. Always make sure that it's all the way around the kingpin. And that's it for the connection right here. Let's move on to the trailer. Alright, we're going to start from the front of the trailer. We got a reefer right here, so you want to just make sure the lights and the reflectors on the top of your trailer in the front, this side and the other. So the lights and reflectors are present. There is no damage to them. They're proper color amber, no moisture in there, and also they're not missing. Header board should not have any kind of modification. No missing rivets, no holes or any sort of cracks or damage to it. Now we're going to move on to the side of the trailer. Making sure the whole frame, the side skirt, making sure that it does not have any sort of damage to it. All the hardware is present. And also making sure the lights and reflectors, these have reflectors integrated to it. Making sure that these are securely mounted, there is no damage to it, proper color amber, no moisture in there, and it should be clean all the time. This one does look a little loose. It looks like it's missing a screw, so we're going to have to grab one and tighten this up. Now we have our DOT tape on the side of the trailer. There's no damage to the tape. It should be at least 50%, not missing. And also making sure it's proper color and clean all the time. Another thing we're going to check is the cross members. Checking under the trailer from the front all the way to the back of the trailer, making sure none of the cross members are missing, damaged, bent, or loose. And making sure the holes, the floor does not have any kind of holes or modification to it under. Oh, there is one? Alright, we're going to have to report that to the maintenance. Alright guys, we're going to move on to the landing gear. There are a few things to the landing gear. The landing gear foot, it should be properly raised from the ground. It should not be missing any hardware. Checking on both sides and making sure the landing gear is not missing any parts. It is securely mounted to the bottom of your trailer. All the brackets are present, and making sure the handle does not have any damage to it. It is in a locked position and it should be functional. Alright, we're going to keep going back. Another light over here. I will inspect this light, and it also has some reflectors in there. We're going to inspect this the same way we inspect earlier right there. Alright, moving on to the sliding tandem right here. Make sure that it is securely mounted to the bottom of your trailer. There is no visible damage to it. The locking pins are in lock position. And also your release handle, making sure the release handle is in secure position and it's not bent, broken, or cracked. Now we're going to move on to your suspension. Starting with the spring mount, it is securely mounted. No damage to it. It's properly mounted to the frame. It's not missing any hardware. Then we have our leaf springs right here. Leaf springs are not shifted. They're not damaged. They're not loose. There is no damage to them. They are securely mounted with the U-bolts, making sure the U-bolts are securely mounted. They're not damaged, and making sure all the hardware is present, not loose or missing. We do not have shock absorbers right here, and we do not have airbags. But we do have Another thing here is called torque arm, making sure the torque arm is present, free of damage, no missing parts to it. Now we're going to move on to your brake system. We have air hoses. So your brake hoses right here, making sure the fittings are present, they're not loose, damaged, or missing. There's no audible leak to it. And the hoses itself, they're not kinked, there's no damage to it, no weather rot and any sort of audible leak around here. Moving on to the chamber. Your brake chamber is secured and present, there is no damage to the brake chamber, no audible leaks, and you want to make sure that the band that you clamp around it is present, it's not missing or loose. We do have our slack adjuster and a push rod right here, making sure there is no damage to the slack adjuster, and the push rod is not bent, broken, or cracked. And your cotter pin and your locking pin that keeps them together, it's present. It's 90 degree to the chamber, and once you release the brakes, after you chock the wheels, you will pull on it to make sure there is no more than 1 inch of a plate. Then we move on to our drums and brake pad. There is no visible damage to the drum, no heat damage or bluing that will indicate that there is damage. And making sure my brake pads are secured, there is no damage to it, it's not missing any chunks out of it, and they are not dangerously worn. Alright, now we're going to move on to your wheel right here. We're inspecting both of the tires the same. The side walls, making sure there are no abrasions, bruises, or cuts in between the tires. They're not rubbing against each other due to low air pressure, making sure there is no objects stuck in between. And also the rims in the middle of your tire, making sure there is no daylight or a gap. And the top surface of your tire, they are evenly worn. The tires are not mismatched, no nails, no cuts or chunks missing out of it. I found a little bubble over here. I'm gonna have to report that. Looks like a seal, but I'm gonna double check. Rim, it is securely mounted. There is a little bend to it, to the bead right here. We'll report that, but I don't hear any audible leak. That's a good thing. There's no damage to the rim. There's no unauthorized weld to it. Lug nuts are all present. They're not loose. They're not missing. And you're looking at the threads. No shiny thread that will indicate they're loose. Now we're going to move on to your hub seal right here. Securely mounted, all the hardware is present, there is no damage to it, and there is no leak coming out of it. Should be proper level. Got the last part right here is your belt stem, making sure the belt stem does not have any damage, it's not loose or damaged, it's not missing a metal cap. And again, no audible leaks. You will use the air pressure gauge to check the air pressure in your tire. Now the last part, I missed it, is the thread. Should be minimum 2/32 on it. ABS light right here. Some trailers have them, some don't. ABS light should be securely mounted, no damage to it, proper color and clean, no moisture in there. Now we're going to move on to the back of your trailer. Your mud flaps are present, they're not ripped or torn. All the hardware is present. Proper DOT tape is present. It should be clean. You can use a little cleaning here, but you're making sure there's a proper clearance from the ground and there's proper clearance from the tire as well. Back of your trailer, there's no visible damage to the door, no holes or modification. All the hardware. This is a roll-up door, so you want to make sure all the hardware is present. There's no damage to it. Handle is functional in a locked position. It's not missing any hardware. there's a proper DOT tape, there's some damage to it. It's not so bad, but you want to make sure that it's proper color and clean all the time, and it should be 100% at the back of your vehicle. Looking at my lights at the back and my lights and reflectors on the top right there, those clearest lights, making sure they are proper color, they're clean, there should be no damage to it, they're red in color and no moisture in there, and that goes for these lights as well. Bumper is a little damaged and also missing a DOT tape. We can use that, and also found another defect right here. The right side of the mud flap is ripped. Report that to the maintenance.